Remember when anyone used to depict like driving like with their hands, like your hands on the steering wheel, and people would be driving like this. And growing up, I really thought you get your first impressions from the things you see, and I really thought when you were driving around in a car, the steering wheel you just do like this, and it turns out the reason why, and of course we all know this, why people do this is because that's a big motion so that a bunch of people can see. Could you imagine like if people actually were doing, or they do it now because now this doesn't really work. And if you're doing this, people are like, wait a minute, does he know how to drive a car? But so now, because now it's, now because it's always very subtle. There's no way you ever turn the steering wheel like this. Even when you're turning, there's no reason to ever do this. But this was always for years. This was if you always wanted to be like, oh, there was one time I was driving, right? And sometimes it's one-handed, right? And it's still like, you're still like, what is this? If you actually got in a car, because you do try it, right? Maybe one time you get in the car, maybe in a parking lot, and you're like, "What? So what if you do?" And your car just starts swerving all over the place. Like, this is completely impractical. But nowadays, I hear the next generation doesn't even want to drive. Like they have no interest in driving. It's too much of a hassle, they say. Especially, they got other things to look forward to. They've got things like Uber, and everything gets delivered by a drone. You don't have to worry about anything. They're coming out with the autonomous cars. Some people are just waiting for that. Some people, I think that I've been just like, you know what? I'll just wait for that to come out because then I don't have to worry about this because driving seems so, complicated or difficult. Everyone's always complaining about it. And it's a crazy shift because and it's not a crazy shift, but back in my day, it's so anytime you say that, it's you think you're old or something like that. You're like, oh, back in my day. But when I was growing up, getting a driver's license was like your first sign of freedom. That was like you could go, right. It's one of those things where like it's complete freedom. But it came with a lot of mistakes because your first time out driving is it's very different from when you're learning how to drive. When it's the real deal, you're bound to make one or two mistakes. So I might get it. Oh, there's also these scooters. I know I'm getting off track here, but I live in kind of like a college town, and I think other people could just because like everything is also in your town. You don't need to go anywhere really. I mean, we're at, and especially in some of these towns, everything is really close. Like everything important is on one street, and it's got everything you could dream of, from top to bottom, zip to zappity doodah. And so so there's these scooters, and you can just take them around town, and it's like an app. I know it's crazy technology, and you scan it, and you hop on, you just scoot around, and I thought it was super interesting. And I wanted to get behind it because I was like, oh, what are these people doing if they're not going to be driving? Like, this could be a fun, like, electric scooter. That sounds fun. Doesn't care how old you are. You're like, that sounds like a fun idea. But you look ridiculous when you're trying to get on one of these things. I was like, okay, I'm going to go and try and find and ride one of these. I walked out, went and found one, and there was two of them. I was like, oh cool, I have two opportunities because knowing me, one of these things isn't gonna work. And so I get on one of them, scan the app, nothing, and it says, well, this one's out of battery or not charged. I'm like, oh great. There's a second one, get on the same thing, nothing. I'm like, well, this was a total bust. I walked all the way over here. Like I went in the opposite direction of where I was going so I could pick one of these cool things up and ride around. But that's how it forces you to do the exercise, and that's how they get you. My first, anybody remember their first outing when they went out driving? Like their first, I remember when I first got my driver's license, I just wanted to go anywhere. I didn't care how far. I just wanted to get in the car and drive by myself or drive myself somewhere, anywhere. And I chose a donut shop because, I mean, if donuts, am I right? Come on. And so And not only that, this trip was super short. It was just down a hill and make a one turn. I tried to keep it real simple for my first outing, all right? I tried to be cautious. Plus, luckily, donuts were close by. So I drove down the hill, and I make a left, and I get the donuts. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. So far. And I come back to the light, and now all I have to do is make a right. Even simpler than the left. And then I had to make this right. So I make this right, and I start turning, and for whatever reason, the donuts on the front seat start sliding. Not much, but enough to cause me panic. And I thought, I can't ruin the prize. Like, this is I gotta complete my first outing. I can't just leave the house and not complete the mission, which is delicious. So I reached over, and not only did I reach over, I apologize, I looked away from everything else to protect the donuts. And I turned, and I went a little bit too far, went in kind of the second lane, hit the curb. Pop is what I heard, and I thought, oh no. What does that even mean? Because I've never driven by myself. It's totally different when you're by yourself. You know, when you're with people and something happens, somebody, hopefully the person driving, is like, oh, at least I know the general area, what that might have been. I've heard that noise before, right? But me, never made these mistakes alone, and you're in total panic mode, and you're, oh, that can't be good. And then you hear the dreaded click-clunk, click-clunk, click-clunk. I thought the car had split in half. I had no idea what had happened. All I had known was, oh no. So I pulled off to the side after driving a little ways, because you try to warp your mind around it. At first you're like, all right, well, the noise isn't that bad, and then the noise gets worse. It's like, hey, click, 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 click. Oh, you're like, oh, all right. It's more serious than I thought. So you pull off the side of the road, and you got to make a few phone calls, but it's a stressful situation. And luckily, there's donuts, so you have one, because, well, that's nice. And after that, you've calmed down, you've collected yourself, you got to make the dreaded phone call, right? And in this case, we all know who it's to. If you're just learning how to drive, I call the old parents. And you never want to really say, you got to downplay the situation, and you don't really know what to say at all. You just kind of get on and be like, oh yeah, I got donuts, right? Start with the positive. And then, yeah, I think I hit a curb and busted a tire. And you're so worried that your life is over and that you'll never get to drive again, that you barely get those words out. And luckily, they get so concerned just for you, like, oh, I'm glad everything's okay and the car's okay, and we'll send somebody to get the car fixed if it's just a tire. You're great. I'm like, oh, cool. How long will that take? A few hours? Huh. More donuts. That's not the moral of that story, but they were delicious. Because that's not even the true story, really. Because you had to, right, like I said, you got to downplay the situation. You can't give them the full truth right off the gates, right? Because everything kind of smoothed itself out. Because what really happened is, not only did I turn away and protect the donuts, which they did help in the pinch I then created for myself. So, positives. And I drove over the center divider. I didn't hit the center divider. I drove over the center divider, and then the car was sitting onto oncoming traffic. And I'm sitting there just frozen with fear. Because what are you supposed... what do you do? I saw cars driving down the same hill I just came down to get donuts. I'm sitting looking at them going, well, then now how do I get back over there? Because I definitely shouldn't be here, right? Like, you start slowly starting to go, hey, wait a minute, this is a real life situation. And so I quickly drove back over the center divider. And of course, I started hearing the clunks right after that. So, because you never, the full story is a very difficult situation. There was one time when I was coming home with, it was a foggy night. Now you got to like throw in extra defenses, because you could throw too many of these stories in there and you're really going to be like, well, why would I want to go through that? It's fun times. It's a really foggy night. And I'm coming home and it's almost impossible to see, and I'm super stressed because it's you can't see at all. I'm in like in a canyon. There's no lights. See, really defense, really build it up. And I'm driving and I get home and I feel so victorious that I made it through and didn't do anything drastic or crazy, that now I thought there was an opportunity to try something I had little to barely I was bad at, which is parallel parking. I was like, oh, this is perfect. I just went through that whole excursion, and now I'm prepared to do this thing that I'm terrible at on a hill, on a downward slope in a minivan. All these things are not adding up good, but this is what I attempted. So I pulled in, and I'm trying to do the whole back end, and I just hear just a tiny thud. I promise. And I get out of the car and I walk around. The mailbox, not my mailbox, but the mailbox, destroyed. And I gotta tell you, this thing was a 4x4 brick inlaid mailbox. I mean, this thing was not just like a post in the ground with a little box on top. This thing was brick inlaid, cemented into the ground with like lava rocks. Have you ever seen lava rocks? They're like red. They're like really cool rock. Terrible picking weeds out of, but that's another time. And so this mailbox was destroyed. And so I'm thinking, oh no, if I did that much damage to the mailbox, what did I do to the car? Again, just a tiny thud, I promise. And I'm looking around at the car. You start inspecting all the car, and I can't find anything. I'm going over this thing for like 5 minutes. I can't find a single dent, scratch, hitch, niche, bombalaboo. Don't know what that was, but I can't find a single divot, nivet, or hivet. There we go. And but then I look at the taillight, and there's a tiny hole in the taillight. Like the glass had kind of broken, and like a kind of not like a perfect hole. That would have been cool, but because at least you go, hey, look, hey, you start off with the, hey, look at that, and then you go, oh, but and I'm going, what the? How did barely no damage to that, and you destroyed and you're just sitting there going, well, now what do I do? Because you can't. I'm not going to formulate the words to explain what I just did. So it's one of those things where you just kind of walk in and just with a blank face, like I'm already as pale as it is. So it experienced like I was translucent. I don't know if that's any better, or any worse, but that's what we were going for. And I'm just pale as like I'm ghost. I was just like see through. And they're like, hey, what happened? And you can't even formulate words. You just kind of point outside. You're like, okay, would you follow me out? Because at this point, if they just see it, they'll put 2 and 2 together, and then they can figure it out, and I won't have to explain it. So I bring them outside, and my father looks at what looks at the mailbox, looks at the car, looks at me, looks at the mailbox, looks at the car. It's like one of those things where it's like he's processing information. And then I thought, you think you're a dead man. But then he just fell to the floor laughing. I've not seen this man laugh in my entire life until he started laughing as hard as he was. The only other time I saw him laughing this hard was when moments before I thought he was going to kill me. Because, before some of this, when he was teaching me how to drive, right, we were driving around, just the two of us, and we saw a Taco Bell. Right, and it's back in those days when even if you just have a couple bucks, you're like, oh, I could get a taco, and you even think, oh, you'll coerce El Padre. You'll go, oh, I'll buy you a taco too. It's only $2. You got a couple, so score. And then of course, your dad goes, no, we're not out like having tacos. We're trying to get something done. But he has the audacity to make you drive around because, he's teaching me how to drive. He's telling me where to go. He makes me drive around the Taco Bell. Just circle the Taco Bell. Like, oh, drive, make a left, make a left, make a left, make a left. And I'm like, what do you do? This guy's taunting me. And I go, oh, no. I don't know where this came from. It's one of those moments where it's like you either try it and it fails or whatever. And so I just pulled into the drive through. And as soon as I pulled through the drive-through, I came to a screeching halt because as soon as I did that, I felt all the air rush out of my body. And I was like, oh, what did I just like? This was a bad idea. And my hands are just frozen on the steering wheel, and I'm just gripped with fear. And I kind of just started looking over, and I thought, this is it. And of course, he just fell to the floor laughing. So I figured, you know, that's how the cookie crumbles on this one. Maybe when it's so audacious, you just kind of like it's so you just like, well, that's ridiculous. And so shockingly, I made it through. And now you get to go on long drives, right? Remember that was the captivating thing about wanting to learn how to drive, because you can just get in the car and just go, right? Like I lived in California, just drive on the beach, or not drive on the beach because you learn very quickly that tires and sand don't go. But like you drive on the highway down to the beach, and it was awesome. But after about what's not cool is after about like 2 years of driving, you learn why everybody is so upset, because driving is actually a pain, especially out there. The traffic, the stop signs, the stop lights, people honking for no apparent reason. The road has like like the roads haven't been fixed anywhere in like when they were built. That's when their last time. Like I think they're working on it now, but there are potholes everywhere. So I get why some might not want to drive, and that autonomous car thing, I think it would be pretty cool. Then I could just eat that burrito in the car on the way home. And with that, I'm probably going to go get one of those. So this has been another wonderful story, and take what you will out of it, and I hope you had a laugh. So we'll see you guys on the next one. Until next time, bye-bye.